Hello, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Alexandra Schweiger, and I serve as the Young Alumni and Student Engagement Specialist with the CSU Alumni Association. And I am here with our career coach, Angela Hayes. If you are on right now for the One Thing webinar, you are in the correct place. And if you are on here looking for something else, we hope you'll stay because I think there is going to be lots of fun tidbits and pieces of information ahead and whatnot. First and foremost, we have a crew logging in from all across the United States. So please feel free to put in the comments where you're watching from, if you're an alum, what year you graduated, anything you'd like to share with us tonight. This comment box is also where you will share questions, thoughts, ideas. This is a webinar, so you will stay muted and your camera off the entire time, but I will serve as your voice. So after we get through the webinar, you get all your new tips and tricks. I will ask any questions you have, and Dr. Angela Hayes will go ahead and answer those for us. I also want to give a quick shout out to our CSU Alumni Association members. Your membership truly does make events like this possible. So if you are a member, thank you. We couldn't do this without you. Momentarily, I will also put some membership resources in the chat. If you have any questions about membership or want to learn more, I am happy to connect. But with that, you did not come here to hear me talk tonight. So I'm going to leave this short and sweet and turn it over to Angela. Angela, it is all you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Angela Hayes, the Associate Director of Alumni and Online Career Engagement. And I want to give you just a little bit of background about why I chose this particular topic at this particular time. The reason is over the last 2 years, it's been just a really stressful, draining time for at least the clients that I've talked to, and certainly friends, family. And so I wanted to find a topic that would help to, let's just narrow it down. Like, what one thing do you want to accomplish? Because there have been so many things. We're pulled in so many directions, and all of us, because of the situations that we've been in with the pandemic and other kinds of things happening in the world, we're all sitting at some level of fight, flight, or freeze. So some level of that kind of anxiety-provoking area that just makes things seem more overwhelming than maybe they have in the past, and then they will in the future. So I wanted to bring it down to thinking about one thing. So that's what we'll talk about tonight, how to use the thinking of one thing and then building toward that one thing to bring unlimited success. It's a step-by-step process. So let's jump in and talk about it. The author of The One Thing, a book called The One Thing, and founder of the largest real estate company in the world, Gary Keller, says that the key to extraordinary success is that daily focus on one thing that will make the most difference in working toward and achieving your most important goal or goals. And we'll talk about both, if you're going to focus on just one or one thing in each area of your life. He acknowledges that this is counterintuitive in our multitasking world. We'll be talking about multitasking in a bit. It's a myth. It's not real. He says that success comes from doing the right things sequentially, each connected to and building on the one before it, rather than doing lots of unrelated things simultaneously, which is frankly what most of us do. When you dream big and then you make your dream your goal, you're on your way to extraordinary success. And getting there will require working backwards. So from the big goal, and we'll talk about how to decide what that is, and then narrow in on the specific steps that you need to take to get there. Your work will take on momentum as you tackle and accomplish these smaller goals along the way. As you focus on each smaller one thing until you master it, then you can move on to the next thing, and the next thing will be easier because you've mastered the thing before. So let's start talking more specifically about how to do that. Many of us spend our days working through all sorts of to-do lists, either written or in our heads, when the list is viewed as if one thing isn't more important than another thing on the list. Others have jobs where they're often in reaction mode. They wait to see what comes up, what they need to deal with, what fires need to be put out. Others go through the day sort of aimlessly doing the minimum to get by, which is what a lot of us have done during all of the stress of the last couple of years. Or we might just get busy with so many responsibilities and never really stop to think about what we really want to accomplish, or have time to think into the future to decide what's possible. That's been another thing that's been affected during all of this, is our ability to think into the future, because we don't really know what's coming. And so we're going to talk about how to do that tonight, how to think into the future. We'll go as far as 5 years into the future. So we'll make a plan, evaluate what you really want, and make decisions about how to get what you really want. So how do you decide that one thing you want to accomplish? And as I said, it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be the one biggest thing in several areas of your life. You can have one big thing in your professional life, personal life, health, hobbies, and so on. So just think for a moment, and you're all muted, so I won't be asking you, but just think for a moment, if you could accomplish just one big thing, what would it be? And again, it can be in anything. Personal life, professional life, hobbies, anything. If it could be one thing, and think big, what would be that one thing that you'd want to accomplish? It could be writing a book, running a marathon, starting a new business, launching a new product. It can be starting a blog. It could be anything. Just think and maybe jot down one thing that you'd really like to accomplish. Having your one thing defined, written down, and eventually made public will help set the stage for taking that big goal and breaking it down into daily chunks of time. That means instead of wistfully thinking and dreaming about improving your skills or starting your business or whatever your big goal may be, you're actually making daily progress toward making it happen. Once you have that one thing in mind, you can think about how to break it down. So if your one thing is writing a book, it might be writing at least 1,000 words per day. If it's running a marathon, it might be waking up early every day to run for a few hours, or that's way out of my comfort zone. So whatever it is people do, I don't know if they run for a few hours, whatever it is they do to get ready for a marathon. If it's launching a new product, it could be setting up a product timeline to hit your deadlines with product creation, beta testing, email marketing, content, and so on. We'll be talking later in the presentation about what to do if those big chunks of time just aren't possible for you right now. There are still ways to keep moving forward on the way to where you want to go. Next, you'll be setting aside time each day to focus on your one thing. Again, it might be 2 or 4 hours, or depending on what you can do, it might be 30 seconds. And again, we'll later talk about how you can still be moving forward even with 30-second blocks of time. And throughout this process, you'll work until it's just automatic to take that time every day that you've set aside to do the type of activity that moves you toward your goal. And then the next challenge will be to identify and get rid of distractions. It's easy for those distractions to be part of our everyday lives. We've created subconscious habits that take up valuable time. Scrolling through social media, for example, responding to every alert that comes up on our phone or email, or just things that take us away from whatever it is we're trying to focus on. It's time to identify what those things are and decide what you want to let go. On those days when you don't feel motivated to do your one thing and you can't seem to push through, remember, I've got ideas backed by research on what you can do to keep yourself moving forward, even in tiny amounts of time. So let's again talk more generally, and later in the presentation, we'll talk specifics of setting and achieving your goals. So you start by thinking big. What is your most extraordinary goal? If there were no limits, because there aren't, If there were no limits, what would be that biggest goal for you? What do you think is beyond your reach? It's not. Start there and then begin breaking it down smaller and smaller until you can think of something that you can do today that will move you toward that goal. Then imagine focusing on that thing exclusively until you have it done, and then move on to your next one thing in line to move you toward achieving your goal. Extraordinary focus on one thing each day leads to extraordinary success. It's amazing how exponential these specific things can become. It seems like just a small thing, but it's amazing how it builds up over time and gets you closer and closer to that goal. One of the ways you go small is by ignoring the vast number of things you could do, because there's plenty of distractions out there, and keep your focus on the right things. Continually connect your immediate actions with the one big thing that you ultimately want. Now, most of us act in a way that's opposite of this. We set modest goals that we're not that excited about, and then we keep busy with what seems important in the moment. We work from jam-packed schedules of unprioritized to-do lists that keep getting longer and probably keep taking us further away from what we really want in life. Big success comes from doing a few things really well, subtracting rather than adding to our daily task list. Do fewer, more impactful things, and your daily focused achievements will add up to big success. Thinking big and focusing small works in every aspect of your life. It's all about identifying that one thing that most advances your purpose in each area of your life. Or you can pick just one. It doesn't have to be in each area of your life. To start, you can pick just one. You can think of it as taking advantage of the domino effect. I think this is really cool. In 1983, physicist Loren Whitehead found that a single domino can bring down another domino that's 50% bigger. When you pursue your goals with that one right thing, you build energy toward achieving bigger and bigger things, moving you toward the ultimate goal. So keep this in mind. If you start with a domino 2 inches tall and go 50% bigger each time, the 18th domino would be the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the 31st would be larger than Mount Everest, and the 57th would be comparable to the height to the distance between the Earth and the Moon. So aim big and use the domino effect to get you where you want to go. Success builds on success as you move from one important thing to the next important thing, and so on until you reach your highest level. Okay, let's talk about the myths about success. We've all been taught myths about success that actually keep us from truly succeeding. Many of us create to-do lists as if everything on the list is equally important. I mentioned that before. And even feel good as we check tasks off that list. I mean, let's face it, it feels really good to check tasks off a to-do list. If I've forgotten to put something on the list and then I do it, I write it down on the list just so I can check it off the list because it feels good. But all things are not equally important. We're all flooded with things that grab our attention every day, and everything feels urgent and important in the moment because it's got your attention in the moment. We can keep ourselves busy with all this, but not really accomplish much. To-do lists are intended to bring order to chaos, but unless they're skillfully prioritized, they lead anywhere but to success. Instead of a to-do list, create a success list. A success list is short, prioritized, and aims you in the specific direction using sequential stepping stones towards success. To turn your to-do list into a success list, follow the 80-20 rule. Research shows that 80% of our success comes from 20% of our efforts. So figuring out what that 20% is vitally important. Focusing on high impact activities is the key to extraordinary success. Okay, multitasking. We've got to talk about that one. I know, again, I brought it up before. It's a complete myth. Our brains simply cannot focus on more than one thing at a time. I find it disconcerting that on almost every position description that I see, it puts multitasking as one of the things that it wants people to be able to do. It's not possible. We don't multitask. That term actually came up in the 60s to refer to computers doing more than one thing at a time. But even computers can't do more than one thing at a time. They actually go back and forth between however many things. And for us, it's a huge waste of time to think that we're multitasking or to think that we can. You've seen what happens. So let's just use an example. You've seen what happens when one thing requires greater attention. For example, if you're walking across a rope bridge over a huge, deep gorge, and before that you were having a conversation with the person you're with, you'll probably stop talking and concentrate on where you're stepping, because you can't really do two things at once, especially when one requires focus. And your big one thing or one things, they require focus. You've probably also had the experience of listening to music or the news in your car until a big storm hits or until you get lost. And then you end up turning off the music or the news because you need to focus during the storm or to get unlost. That's because we really can't do more than one thing at once. Multitasking is not a real thing. Let's talk about work specifically. When you're using your computer at work, if you're like most people, you'll change windows, check email, or other programs 37 times every hour. That's what research tells us. You get a jolt of dopamine each time you switch, which makes it addictive to keep switching. So you lose approximately a third of your workday to distractions. Another thing that research tells us. Because researchers estimate that employees are interrupted every 11 minutes and spend a third of their day recovering from the interruptions. Depending on the complexity of the task, switching from one to another can add up to 25% to 100% more time to completing it. So you're doing it to yourself, and you've got other employees or other things that are interrupting you every 11 minutes. Success is about deciding what matters most overall in the moment and giving that your undivided attention. Let's talk for a minute about discipline. Most people have plenty. Success isn't the result of uninterrupted discipline. It results from applying discipline enough to turn something into a habit. Once it's a habit, it's easy. The research on how long it takes to create and sustain a new habit is all over the board. I've read everything from 28 days to 66 days. But I prefer to bypass the idea of doing something every day for 66 days and rely on the research done by B.J. Fogg at Stanford. We'll talk about this research into how to create new habits more quickly and easily in just a few minutes. Let's talk for a minute about willpower. Willpower is not unlimited. As you draw on willpower, the amount that you have diminishes in any given day. It's like having a full battery on your phone in the morning, and as you use it throughout the day, the battery drains. Things that decrease your level of available willpower are resisting temptation, doing a task you dislike, continually doing a hard task for hours and hours, and suppressing emotion. All those things reduce your level of willpower. Because when we're low on willpower, we tend to do what's easiest or rely on our default reaction. And that's generally not the most productive, and it definitely doesn't lead to extraordinary results. So keep in mind, willpower is not unlimited. Whatever you're going to do, whatever you need to get done, do it early before your willpower gets drained. There's tons of research on what happens as the willpower drains throughout the day. and it's not good. Mistakes are made, decisions aren't as good. So whatever's most important early in the day, use that willpower early in the day. Let's talk for a minute about a balanced life. You see that on the slide also, that you must live a balanced life. That's a myth. It's not possible to constantly live a balanced life. Some things will need to fall by the wayside until you can get back to them. Focus on what's most important, like work and family, and then get back to the other things as you can. At work, go long. Accept that achieving extraordinary results will require extraordinary focus on one thing for long periods. That means allowing other tasks to go undone, but counterbalancing to shift focus and address the most pressing task. Because of course you still need to get your work done. Just need to be really intentional about how you get that done and making sure that there's time to focus on that one thing. In your personal life, go short. You can't neglect your family and friends for long without causing irreparable damage. Shift back and forth between personal priorities to make sure you aren't leaving anything unattended for long. The author James Patterson uses a really nice work-life balance metaphor. He says if you're juggling 5 balls representing work, family, health, friends, and integrity, think about work as a rubber ball. If you drop it, it'll bounce. But the others are glass and will shatter or be damaged if you're careless with them. So you can afford to drop some balls at work. You can recover from that. But it's not as easy in your personal life. Many, many people forget that. And then the last thing, that you shouldn't overreach by thinking too big. Forget about that. Aim high. Your level of success depends on how big you think. If your goal is 10, go for 20. Stretch yourself. Think as big as you can and base your actions on succeeding at the highest level. You grow in the process of reaching for your goals. When you look back, things that seemed insurmountable look smaller now because you've grown in your thinking, your skills, and your supportive relationships. And don't be afraid to fail. Failure is a stepping stone to exceptional results when you choose to learn from your mistakes and adjust accordingly. If you're not making mistakes, you're not doing it right. If you're not failing sometimes, you're not working hard enough. So, the key to success isn't doing more than everyone else. It's focusing on the few right things and doing them very well. You ask the first question, the focusing question here, to determine your purpose, and the second to determine what immediate action will help you reach it. This can apply to every area of your life, like we said before: health, personal life, relationships, spiritual, job, finances. Whatever matters most to you in each area. You might want to think of one skill or passion that's brought you success. If you want to just stop for a minute and think about that. One skill or passion that's brought you success. What one thing could you do to build even more on that success? So this focusing question can be a success habit when you make it a way of life. You can ask the question when you get up, when you get to work, when you get home, and anywhere in between to help you focus on the next most important thing for you to do. At work, it might be, what's one area I could improve my skills in today, this week, this year, however you decide, such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary. What's the one thing I can do to strengthen my relationship with my spouse or child or parents today, this week, this year, such that by doing so, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? An example of a specific exceptional question would be, what can I do to double sales in the next 6 months? This is big, specific, and measurable, which will lead you to look beyond the usual solutions. What can I do to double sales is broad because it lacks a time frame. What can I do to increase sales? It's more like a brainstorming question. And what can I do to increase sales by 5% this next year isn't challenging and will only lead to average results. Finding the exceptional answer involves looking at what is doable, what is a stretch, and what is a possibility. The highest achievers choose the third answer. What's the possibility? What's possible? This represents an extraordinary goal that no one has reached before. It involves finding a path that currently doesn't even exist. To achieve the possible, you'll need to research what's been done before and build on those actions. Benchmark what's been known or achieved in this area. Look for mentors. Look for people who can help you. Look to level up from what's been done to the extraordinary. The focusing question is a double duty question. It comes in two forms: big picture, small focus. One is about finding the right direction, and the other is about finding the right action. So the focusing question, your actions become a natural progression of building one right thing on top of the previous right thing. And when this happens, you're in a position to experience the power of that domino effect that we talked about before. The focusing question collapses all possible questions into the one thing. There are three components to implementing your one thing and achieving extraordinary results: purpose, priority, and productivity. Your big one thing is your purpose. Your small one thing is your current priority, and both purpose and priority drive productivity. How well you connect these three determines your level of success. For the majority of people, lasting happiness comes from becoming engaged in and finding meaning and purpose in what they do. Your daily actions are driven by your larger purpose, and happiness occurs in the process of fulfilling your purpose. There are a variety of ways to find your one thing. Again, you can think of it as your purpose. Purpose is the one thing you want your life to be about more than any other. Again, remembering you can have a strong purpose in each area of your life. You want your life to be about that in that area. So to find that, there are a variety of different things you can do. You can write down a list of activities that you're passionate about in the various areas of your life. You could then pick one activity and one outcome that's the most important to you. But my favorite for determining your purpose in each area of your life is the banquet exercise. So for the banquet exercise, imagine that you're toward the end of your life and you're sitting on a stage in a huge banquet hall. And on the stage with you is a person from each area of your life, the person who's known you best, who you really were, what you accomplished in each area of your life. So there might be somebody from work, somebody from your family, someone from the community. You get to pick who's on that stage with you. And then a hush falls over the crowd. And each of these people is going to stand up, go to the microphone, and they're going to tell this huge crowd exactly who you were and what you accomplished in that area of your life. What do you want them to say? Whatever you want them to say in each of those areas is a great way to find your purpose in each of those areas, because you know that your big one thing in each of those areas, that's what you want to have accomplished. That's what you want to have done. That's who you want to be by the end of your life. It's an excellent way to find your purpose in all areas of your life. So once you've decided on your one thing or group of one things, you'll want to post your one thing where you'll see it often. Try it out. If you don't feel 100% happy with it, you can always revise it as you go and get it just right. So Then it's time to determine your priorities. So your purpose is where you want to go. Your priority is what you want to do now to work toward getting to that purpose. It's often hard to make a direct connection from the small things we do now to the big things we want to achieve. The best way to make this connection is to think in steps. Based on your big one thing goal, what can you do in the next 5 years to reach it? Based on your 5-year goal, what one thing can you do this year, each day, to be on track to reach the 5-year goal? Based on your 1-year goal, what can you do this month to be on track to reach your goal? Based on your 1-month goal, what one thing could you do this week to be on track? Based on this week's goal, what one thing could you do today? And based on today's goal, what one thing can you do right now to be on track to achieve your goals today, this week, this month, this year, 5 years from now, and ultimately? Imagine lining up dominoes so that each small step sets off a chain of related actions that ultimately gets you to where you want to go. You might also think again about the 80-20 rule, but go even smaller. Of the 20% that will bring you the most success, what is 20% of the 20% and 20% of that 20%? Keep going until you arrive at the one thing. As an example, Keller, the author of the book, started with a list of 100 ideas of what could make his company number one in the business. He narrowed it down to one idea: to write a book about excelling in real estate. He then broke down the steps to writing the book and blocked off time to get it done. The book became a bestseller, it launched a series of books, and it completely changed the image of his company. He applied the one thing to his personal life to learn to play the guitar. He decided he'd get the greatest impact in his limited practice time by focusing on scales. So he wasn't trying to go for mastery, he just wanted to be able to play. So he started with focusing on scales, then he later decided to go smaller and focus on minor blues scales. Once he mastered that, he was able to play solos of several great classic guitarists. The scale became the one thing that opened the world of rock to him. And then plan your productivity. So once you know your purpose and your immediate future priorities for getting there, you'll need to use your time well to get the results you want. The key is to block time on your calendar as early in the day as you can. Remember, that's also best for your level of motivation. To focus on your priority and don't let anything but an extreme emergency keep you from using that block of time to build toward your one thing. Toward the end of the year, block off time to look at what you've accomplished in moving toward your goal and what you need to do to be on track the following year to achieve your goal. Also, if you can, block off an hour each week to review your weekly, monthly, and yearly goals and priorities. As things get busy, sometimes it's easy to lose sight. And then protect your one thing with time blocking. Time blocking is what the authors refer to as productivity's greatest power tool. The same principle is applied when you schedule important activities like a doctor's visit, an appointment at the DMV, a client meeting. These things rarely get postponed because they've been scheduled, or we might say time blocked. And so the act of doing your one thing should be protected in the same way, or even more so. This means scheduling a non-negotiable amount of time each day devoted to doing your one thing. Of course, this means no distractions or multitasking. Turn off all notifications, avoid emails and meetings, close your door, hang up a do not disturb sign if you need to, or if you need to go to some other office or some other room where nobody knows you're there, take your computer with you or whatever you need and just hide out during that time. You've told people that that's what you're working on, but unless there's an emergency, they don't need to come find you. Tell a couple people where you are, of course, in case there is an emergency. Remember, identifying your one thing is only one part of the equation. The other part is actually ensuring that it gets done, and it's vitally important to have blocks of time to be able to do that. And your block time will be continually tested. Others will want to pull you away to deal with other things or work on other projects or to just chat. Your one yes to your one big thing is likely to have to be defended over time by 1,000 no's. Let your life be about what you say yes to instead of what you should have said no to. And then make the most of that block time. Remember that mastery is a process. It's based on a desire to become the best you can be by doing your most important thing and realizing that there are always things to learn, always new levels of expertise to reach. Mastery of the right thing topples your first domino and makes everything else easier or no longer necessary. The concentrated time you spend is much more important than raw talent. This has been proven over and over. Psychologist K. Anders Ericsson disproved the idea, was the first, and there's been many since then, that top performers excel because they're gifted. They found that they reached elite levels because of intense and deliberate practice over many years. 10,000 hours of intense and deliberate practice is what's been cited by the most researchers as the amount of time needed to master something. When you approach your time blocks with a mastery mentality, each level you achieve prepares you for the next because you're growing in knowledge, skills, and competence, and that gives you momentum for further successes. I'd also like to stop here and have you keep in mind that the 10,000 hours is for that all these researchers have talked about to achieve mastery. That's for very difficult things, like becoming a master of the violin or achieving Olympic level mastery of a sport, or becoming an expert in a very, very complex subject. Your one thing might not require 10,000 hours. In fact, in most cases, it probably won't. When you do set out to do something, you have a choice between doing the best that you can do or the best that it can possibly be done. If your goal is to just do your best, that's unlikely to bring extraordinary success, but that might be enough depending on what you've picked. But for true mastery, you need to continually improve how you do your one thing, seeking out new and better ways to do what you're doing. This allows you to truly unlock your potential because you don't know what you're capable of until you push past what you think you're capable of. You can choose, the last thing here, holding yourself accountable. It's very important. So you can choose to be accountable and be the author of your life, or you can choose to be unaccountable and be a victim. We all know people who seem to have that kind of attitude. An accountable person acknowledges and seeks to understand the reality, tackles the tasks or the problems, takes ownership, and finds solutions. Someone with a victim attitude avoids or fights reality, blames people or circumstances, makes excuses, and waits and hopes that things will improve. Either attitude becomes a habit. Being accountable or being a victim, either one becomes a habit. Research shows, of course, that the accountability habit leads to much better results, often extraordinary results. Now let's talk about how to create that success habit, because for many of us, it's not realistic to think that starting tomorrow, we're going to set aside 4-hour blocks of time every morning to work on our one thing, and we'll stick to it every day, and that this will lead to amazing success. I'd like to think that that's how the world works, but I know that it often doesn't. And that's why I'm giving you some additional information about how you can still move toward your goals without that 4-hour block of time starting tomorrow. So for those of you who can do that, I mean, great. For those of you who say, yes, starting tomorrow, 4-hour blocks of time, that's great. More power to you. Right now, I'm talking to those who think that it might be pretty challenging to do that. So if you think it might be difficult for you to just hit the ground running with the one thing, I would highly recommend the habit formation methods that come from the research of B.J. Fogg out of Stanford. His research shows that if you start with very small habits, they will grow exponentially in a fairly short period of time. The easiest way to do this is to pick a few routines that you already do during the day and anchor new positive habits to those routines. The key is that the new habits need to be really small because you want to get immediate, good, reinforcing feedback for doing this small habit. I promise you they will grow exponentially from there. I've seen it in my own life and my clients' lives. It happens. If you keep them very small in the beginning, and if it's been designed correctly. If it's not working, you just need to figure out why and try again. Research shows that people have the most routines that they can tap into in the morning. That's great because we also talked about motivation being the highest in the morning, and also just getting that block of time done in the morning. That way you're done with it and you can take care of other things the rest of the day. So if you shrink the behavior enough, you can do it no matter how low your motivation. Because let's face it, some days our motivation is really low. There are two ways to make a behavior tiny enough so that it doesn't matter. Your discipline, your motivation, none of it matters. Two ways. You can do a starter step. Like let's say you wanted to walk 30 minutes per day. A starter step would be putting on your walking shoes every day for the first week, and that's it. If you want to eat healthier and start by cooking yourself a hot breakfast, a starter step could be turning on a stove burner and then turning it back off. And that's it for the first week. I know it sounds silly, but it works. The other way is to scale back. For example, if you want to walk 30 minutes daily, you can put on your walking shoes and walk to the front gate or the mailbox. If you want to cook a healthy hot breakfast, make instant microwave oatmeal to start for that first week. The most important thing is to keep the tiny habit alive. Maybe you went past the gate and you walked 20 minutes yesterday. If you aren't up for it today, just walk to the gate. Consistency is the key. Tiny habits should be easy and growing them should feel fun, not like a chore. The low baseline is always the baseline. Doing more is always optional. If you're not up to anything else, just perform the tiniest version of that habit. And remember to anchor them to specific routines you're already doing. That helps you remember to do it until it becomes automatic. So let's say you want to eventually double your number of clients in the next year. From there, it depends on how you'd like to approach it. Do you want to write a book about your field to reach a larger audience? Do you want to read the top 20 business books about growing your client base? Do you want to significantly build your skill set so you can attract more clients? Or do you want to do all three? The next step is to break down the largest goal into something really small to start, and then anchor those new behaviors to something that you're already doing. When you do that, take two things into account: the physical location and matching the frequency. So for the physical location, consider the physical location of the new habit and pick an anchor that you already do in that location. If you want the habit to be spending time every day writing a book about your area of expertise, for example, have the anchor be something that you're already doing in a spot that makes it easy for you to write, let's say 2 sentences, or a very broad outline that you add to each day, or whatever it is that you decide. So your anchor might be turning on your computer. Your anchored habit would go like this: every morning when I turn on my computer, I will immediately write 2 sentences of my book. So your office might be the best pick for the physical location. If you need to switch locations, you're less likely to carry out the behavior. So you wouldn't want it to be something like, after I wipe down the kitchen counters, I'll write 2 sentences of my book. It's the most important aspect of pairing anchors and new habits, being in the same physical location. The next is just matching the frequency. Look at your existing routine and decide how often you want to do the new habit. If you want to do it once per day, then attach it to an anchor that happens once per day, like turning on your computer in the morning. If you want it to happen 4 times per day, attach it to an anchor that happens 4 times per day. If that's not working, just change it. Experiment until you find what works. What anchor works with what new behavior? Let's look at an example. It's a true example. Melissa's business had been flailing and she felt overwhelmed with everything she had to do to get it back on track. She decided to try the tiny habit approach. Each morning when she dropped her daughter off at school, when the car door closed after her daughter got out, that was her anchor, when the door closed, She thought of it as the beginning of her workday. She immediately found an open parking space and wrote the one most pressing thing she needed to get done that day for her work, just one, on a sticky note. Then she would drive home and put that sticky note on the wall next to her desk where she could easily see it. On most days, she went ahead and did the task. On some days, she didn't. But she kept writing the tasks on the Post-it note every morning and stuck them to that wall. Eventually, she wrote down 2 most important things that she needed to get done that day that would align with her 1 month, 1 year, 5-year goal for her business. And then she went to 3 most important. And eventually, she was spending 2 to 4 hours every morning working on building her business. Fairly quickly, things began to turn around. Melissa is so successful that she now has 20 people working for her. She was a company of 1 at the beginning of this story. 20 people working for her to fill all the requests for her company's services. So if you can't see yourself immediately jumping into that 2 to 4 hour time block, consider easing in with small habits that you can build on. Remember that success leads to more success. Just think of it as starting with smaller dominoes. If you want to learn more about this approach, feel free to contact me, or I'd also highly recommend the book, Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything by BJ Fogg from Stanford. And finally, allow yourself to live large. When you stop limiting your thinking, you remove the limits to where you can go in life. Getting there requires then working backward from that big goal to determine the specific steps that you need to take to get there. Then you're building momentum towards your goal by focusing on each one thing until you master it, which then adds to the next thing and the next thing. By taking action now, you avoid the alternative, which is feeling regret later. Researchers have found that what people regret most at the end of life are the things that they didn't do, the chances that they didn't take. The way to avoid this is to make sure that each day you do what matters most. You are the engineer of your success. You are that first domino. So, what questions do you have?
Awesome. Well, first, I would just like to say thank you, Angela, again, and thank you to all of those who are on tonight. I know if we were in a room right now, we would do a round of applause. So thank you, thank you. We've gotten some really good questions, and please feel free to continue to put questions in the comments. This one I thought was interesting, Angela. If you have recommendations for accomplishing the one thing when your environment doesn't necessarily support your goals.
Yes, and that happens very frequently. So most people that I work with on this, it's a matter of finding, if it depends on in what ways the environment doesn't support the goals, because sometimes it's a single parent that has 2 jobs and things are so busy, there's just not a way to carve out a big part of the time. Sometimes they've got a partner who's not at all supportive, who's going in a completely different direction. So it depends on that first. But what I would say is to start with the small habits that we talked about, what BJ Fogg did research on, and just start very small in ways that aren't, necessarily bothering anybody else. In fact, it's best if it takes 30 seconds or less when you start. You've got whatever your anchor is, and whenever that anchor happens, you do this thing, and then it just sort of builds from there. So if that didn't answer the question, please ask the question in another way so I have more specifics. But that's typically the best way to go about it, is to start smaller. And then as success builds, if, for example, the environment is that you're with someone who doesn't support it, they might begin to support it as they see the success that's building. Or if, like, let's say when I've worked with single parents who just have a really hard time with having that block of time. We've worked through, brainstormed that they can trade time with another single parent so that they each have that block of time that they can work toward their big one thing.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, feel free to add any additional details in the comments if you do want Angela to elaborate. This one is somewhat along the same lines, and I think was asked in regards to when you were talking about multitasking. But do you have thoughts on how to minimize interruptions when things like Teams, Slack, Zoom, Chime are such a huge part of today's work culture?
Yeah,
It's a tricky one.
Thinking about it, yeah. It's so difficult because that is what most of our work cultures are based on now, is that we're always on, we're always ready, we're ready to hear that chime, we respond right away. But the thing is, unless you work in a business where things are actual emergencies, like you need to respond, so you're an emergency room doctor, yes, of course, you can't say, okay, for 4 hours, I'm just going to block out time and I'm not going to. So not like that, but you can decide, let's say, talk to your supervisor and say, this is a big thing I'm working on for the business, and I've got some great ideas about it, but I need blocks of time to be able to think through that. And would it work for you if I blocked off, let's start with an hour where I turn off all alerts to everything. I put a do not disturb on my door, or I go to another room so that people don't know where I am necessarily. You know where I am as my supervisor, but others don't. I turn everything off, and that means everything. That means your phone also, everything, which I know is very difficult. I read and then immediately forgot the statistic on how many times people pick up their phone during the day. It was so disturbing that I've blocked it out of my mind. But getting support from others to actually block that time out and just not respond. And you might even put on your Slack, working on project for the next hour or whatever, I'll respond when I'm free, something like that. Even for your email, if you need to, if you're getting tons of emails and it seems like the expectation is you're going to get right back, or a Teams call or whatever, just block out that time. It helps if it's the same time every day so that people get used to not bothering you during that time. They know that you're focused and that you're not going to answer anyway. So that's my best recommendation for that. It's very difficult. I agree. It's very, very difficult. And I'm terrible about that. People tell me that I answer their emails before they've hit send on their end. So I'm working on that too. Not seeing everything as something that immediately needs to be answered or gotten done or whatever.
Awesome. I agree. That is a tricky one and good question. So thank you for asking that. You covered a bit of this in your last answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways in case you want to expand. And because I think it's interesting. How would you recommend communicating that you've blocked off time when you're working remote? It seems easier when you're in an office and can close the door. Do you have recommendations for remote?
That is a really good question. And part of the reason that's such a good question is that working remotely, we already feel like people might, even though we're working hard, we might feel that people are thinking that we're not, that we might be taking more breaks during the day than we would if we were in a physical office and that kind of thing. So it can make it feel trickier to say, I won't be available for the next hour or 2 hours. I mean, in the book, he talks about 4-hour blocks of time. I don't know how realistic that is for most jobs. Probably not very realistic. So I would start smaller and build. But I think it would be the same thing. It would be talking to your supervisor about it, that during this time every day, or it doesn't have to be during the same time if it doesn't work with the particular type of work that you do, but for this period of time, I won't be responding to emails, etc. And you can let anyone else know that you want, the other people on your team, whatever message you want to send out, you just have an automated message and they'll eventually get used to it, especially if it's the same time during each day, letting them know that you're just not available during that time. And then do your best not to check it, because it's so hard, because you'll get to a point where you're focused on your one big thing and then you'll think, I wonder if I should just check, keeping in mind that it's going to take you probably 30% of your time to get back to where you were before that interruption. So don't let yourself get interrupted. You might also share those statistics with your supervisor. Let's say you're working on this big thing, and if you get interrupted, it's just going to take longer. And if people aren't respecting that, one thing that some people have done, now this may or may not work for you, is add to their time that they're blocking off. So if they get interrupted, then they're going to add X amount of time, whatever amount of time that took on that same day, 30 more minutes to get it done. And pretty soon people will get used to the idea that it doesn't really work to try to interrupt you during that time. Unless it's an extreme emergency, there's no reason to interrupt you during that time.
Awesome. I think we've gotten through all of the questions. I know we are winding down. We have another minute or two. So if you have any last minute questions, feel free to pop them in the chat quickly and we'll get those answered. But I just want to say thank you again to everyone on the webinar today. At least here in Colorado, it's nice and sunny. So we're grateful that you choose to spend your time with us. And again, thank you, Angela. Truly, the Alumni Association is so lucky to have you as a resource. If you all are dying for more Angela time, we have her back April 6th, I believe, for salary negotiations for women. But I would also encourage you all to check out the full schedule of events at alumni.colostate.edu. And with that, I will say thank you. Have a wonderful night. And of course, go Rams.